let me tell you, though, where the unworthiness comes from and what you described, and you described it quite accurately, what happens in children and why. I've said this before, and maybe you haven't heard it directly, or maybe you haven't heard it in one of my teachings, but I've spoken this often. It's a very basic principle in psychology. Um, and psychology gets it right. This one they do get right, but they don't take it to the level of the absolute and bring in the God factor. Um, but the principle's the same. I just take it higher. In a child's eyes, from birth all the way up, and to some degrees it stays forever, but it gets weaker and weaker as your intellect and psyche and your identity and personality get stronger, your powers of reasoning and the development of your brain and your life experience, it diminishes. But intrinsically, this, what I'm going to speak, stays in a child forever. Obviously, it's strongest at birth, and it's super strong right up until your teendom, when the ego structure really starts building and the separation starts happening, the weaning from the parents and the building of the identity. So in those first 10 to 13 years, it's consummate. And that is, in a child's eyes, the child views and sees the mother and father as God itself. Not substitute, not surrogate, but God itself. Mother, father, God. Not fill-ins, step-ins, placebos, facsimiles, but the baby's born, and that's mother, father, God. God is flawless and perfect and wholesome and pure, perfect love and infallible. Ergo, when anything non-loving occurs, when love isn't given or it's not given purely, or when some violation happens, think of a child's pure, simple mind. That's God, not my mother and father, but they also happen to be, but that's God. And God can't be this. So therefore, that's not possible that they did that. Therefore, I'm the cause and the blame. And it just immediately gets internalized. And that's where the unworthiness and the low self-esteem and the low self-worth, self-hatred, a lot of the programming, all of the programming goes in right then and there. And it starts in utero. It starts from conception. It starts even before conception, because many couples are already talking about their babies with the flavors and distortions of the personality. I want a baby. I don't want a baby. That's already in. That's laid in. I want a girl. I want a boy. So if you want a boy and you birth a girl, that child is already stamped with, I don't like you, I don't want you, I don't love you, and I didn't ask for you. For life. Imprint for life. So these are things parents don't think about. They're not in the space of, because they're ignorant and there's no one training them to say, a child in your womb is the greatest gift in the world. Be grateful for whatever you have. And that applies to what they call, quote unquote, birth defects too. Diseases and ailments and maladies that children are born with. I didn't want that. And the judgments get laid in, and that all gets internalized into the child. If you give birth to a 5-pound ear, then you be grateful. That's what God put in you, and that's what you created and asked for. I can't even tell you, I mean, obviously I wouldn't say names, but how many people kill their own babies in utero if they find out one thing wrong with the child? They go for batteries and batteries of tests. Oh, my child's missing a pinky? Kill it. Get it out of me. Oh, it's going to be blind? Oh, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. No limbs? Kill it. Kill it. There's just such an ignorance. So this is the origin of the unworthiness, and which can grow into self-hatred. So, but again, now you're an adult, and you're a sentient adult who's already had her spiritual awakening. So it's important for you to keep reinforcing that there was nothing wrong with you. You're the best child anyone could have ever had, and you're whole and beautiful and perfect. And, you know, anyone who didn't see that, that's their shortcoming. It's not your shortcoming. And the next step is to be able to have forgiveness for them, compassion and forgiveness for their smallness, for their ignorance, for their fear, for their whatever. There's also something very common in households that I've seen in the 20 years of my ministry and beyond, even before it. Oftentimes in a family, whether it's multiple children or a single child, when an individual gets born into a household and that child is harnessing an enormous amount of light, you know, huge, huge light. Not that everyone isn't, but you know what I mean. There's certain people, I mean, you all know when you see them, they're just, you know, whether you remember your own childhoods or whether when you see them now, you just look at some of these little kids and they're like supernovas. And oftentimes when one of those is born, They're the most heavily abused children because the families cannot bear, the parents or parent cannot bear the constant reminder of how they are not that, or behaving as that, or did not fulfill that in their lives. And it's so unbearable. I couldn't even count how many people have come to me for counseling who had the living daylights beaten out of them mercilessly with fists, with sticks, with belt buckles, being whipped, being stabbed, raped, and they had so much light, you know. And a lot of them killed themselves, run away from home, and just, they got to get out. But again, they internalize it all. So that's also a factor in, you know, in a twisted sort of way. I mean, it's an acknowledgement of the amount of light that was in your aura. That doesn't justify the behavior. But I'm giving you perspective now to see that where your mind took it couldn't be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite in all categories. And now that you're a wise and awakened adult, it's important that you have to remind yourself of that rather than reinforce the belief system that got developed as a child. Reinforce the true one. And look at yourself in the mirror and just keep looking in the mirror and saying, I love you as God loves you. And you are whole and beautiful and perfect. And I love and forgive my parents for their inability to see that and reflect that in their behavior.
And that's just done through discipline, because that one just creeps in.
Yeah, every time it comes in, it's going to come in.
Yeah.
It's you remember, your consciousness, human consciousness is like a fabric. And consciousness is like a fabric. And this is how belief systems, I'll show you how belief systems get built. This would be a good little short film for YouTube. How belief systems get built. Consciousness is like a fabric. And life experience, words, actions, circumstances are like a dye. You take this pure, it's interesting, I have a pure white consciousness, a child's consciousness, directly delivered from the hand, mind, and heart of God into earth, pure and untainted. All of a sudden, you know, it gets dipped in the consciousness of, I didn't want you. So all of a sudden it's got this dark, icky stain on it. Now, it did it once and it was quick. Someone made one comment and I could take this and rinse it. But some of that dye is going to stick. It's not going to be pure white again. Let's call it ink. You know, put it in this deep bluish purple ink. And because someone said one non-loving thing to you, a really one to the core, and you're going to rinse it out, some of it's going to stick. You hear it again, your consciousness gets soaked in it again. And you're going to rinse it and clean it with that reinforcement, but now more of it's stuck. So you start having these thoughts now. You start looking at this and remembering how white it used to be, and now you're looking at yourself saying, wow, I'm not, I guess, who I thought I was. And then eventually it gets darker and darker and darker because your parents keep reinforcing it, and then your friends start reinforcing it, and then the teachers start reinforcing it, and then your boyfriends and girlfriends start reinforcing it, then your spouses reinforce it, and then the people at work reinforce it. And all of a sudden, over time, that consciousness that was I am wholesome and pure, now that tainted, stained, dark fabric, which is your consciousness, has the belief system, because belief systems are different than thoughts and opinions. They're now the fabric of your being. So thoughts and opinions can change fairly easily. Belief systems cannot. They can be changed, but it takes a lot more work. That's why you're all here. So, myself included. That's why I came to the feet of the masters, because those belief systems, the dye couldn't get out. And so that child once saying, I am whole and pure, now looks as this consciousness that says, I am dirty and tainted. This is who I am. You define yourself by your belief systems, which were formed by repetition of non-loving statements and actions and other belief systems thrown in your face and showed to you, shared to you, foisted upon you, and then you become them. So then you get into, then you have a spiritual awakening and you realize, okay, there's something more to this. I need to fix this. I haven't been able to. I've taken courses, I've taken classes, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, you find yourself in a mystical alchemical vortex that has secrets to the universe that the world doesn't know about. It says, we can make this white again. I'm a $6 million man. Guy's all chopped up and broken and he's unfixable. We can rebuild him. We have the technology. But you say, I've done everything. And I say, well, come into this courtyard. This can be fixed. The reason that you didn't think it was fixable It's because the world doesn't know about some of the means of alchemy that can do the undoable and think the unthinkable and restore the unrestorable. So part of that repatterning is that you have to use this mantra, this affirmation of reinforcing when that belief system comes up again, because it's just going to keep coming up, because now you're doing like a reverse dip, you know, the same, but the alchemy that's applied can bend the law of physics and remove an unremovable die. And that is real, and it does happen. But in all fairness, I'm not going to give you some Pollyanna answer. It does take time. Can it happen instantaneously? Yes, and it does on certain topics with certain things. But there's also certain karma to play out and a certain dharma to play out on different topics with different people and different associations. So there's no hard and fast rule, only that everything is forgivable, everything is redeemable, bar none. Even rape, even murder is all forgivable, redeemable, transmutable. There is nothing that isn't, nothing in the world. If that weren't true, there'd be no reason to be alive. Is there anyone in this room, and I'm including myself, who could raise your hand now and say, I want to see how I word this correctly, the way I want it to sound. Oh, let me put it this way, so I don't get into double negatives. How many people in this room, the show of hands, let's say prior to meeting me or prior to today, in case it's already changed for you, how many people at some point in your life, up till you changed if you have, how many people here believed that there was at least one thing you said or did in your life that was unforgivable, that could never be erased or fixed? Almost every hand is up. How many people in this room had more than one thing you thought, there's no way I could ever undo this, be forgiven, forgive myself, any one of the above? More than once. How many people in the room have numerous things that they think were just for whatever reasons, your own judgment, other people's judgments, your own whatever, that just could never wipe it completely clean? So if that weren't true, that everything is forgivable, everything is redeemable, we're all wasting our time. And what kind of God would we be praying to in the first place? That's all loving, all forgiving, all giving, all providing. So it has to be true. So, but humanity as a collective does not believe that and does not agree. How many people say, I'll never forgive you for that? You'll be marked for the rest of your life. You know, or even just coming into the world, certain religions. Original sin. You have a black mark on your soul. And you better beg, grovel for forgiveness all through this life, and maybe you won't burn in hell. Maybe. Even if you're a saint, you might still burn in hell because you had original sin. And you came in with that. Isn't that enough to ruin your whole embodiment? I had to leave the church over that one statement. I could not live with that. And I was arguing with priests at 6 and 7 years old when I was going to catechism class, saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And they'd get in my face, and 9 years old, I should say, was when I really started arguing. I said, that is a fallacy. There is no such thing as original sin. Child is the purest, most beautiful thing that ever graced the surface of this planet, right out of God's hands. And you're telling me that it's bad and evil from birth? Don't buy it. And you're going to beg forgiveness for your entire life, live a miserable, pathetic, horrible life, thinking that you're a worthless piece of crap in the deepest part of the ocean for having done nothing. And maybe you won't burn in hell over it? I'm out of here. I don't buy it. And I don't mean to single out that one religion, because pretty much every religion has some levels of distortion in them. Today's not about religion bashing or exposing, outing religions, but they all have distortions. So, but the point I was making wasn't about religion. It was about the fact that these distorted belief systems are in the fabric of society, still to this day, and still reinforced and heavily believed by the majority of the population. That number is changing very rapidly as the planet is awakening and having its own, the human race as a species is in the midst now of its spiritual awakening, which is an awesome thing. And that hasn't happened in this epoch. Not as an entire species. It's unprecedented. You know, the species is a few million years old, and this is its spiritual awakening right now, and we're alive on the planet. That's pretty awesome. So there have been pockets, you know, golden civilizations, but it wasn't planetary that were very awakened. But this is now like the 100th monkey principle. This is an evolutionary leap in the species itself, which has never happened. So it's huge and it's awesome, but it's also painful. It's very painful. You know. So that's where it came from. That's how we go about fixing it. And yes, it does take discipline. But you also have an amazing community around you. You have a guru you live with, and you have the most amazing husband in the world. So you couldn't be in a better place.
I agree.
And you've got a great intuition. You're very powerfully connected, and you listen to what you hear, and you honor it, which is also critical. There are plenty of people who haven't developed the ability to hear the divine the way you do, and there are plenty of people who hear beautifully and don't listen, or do listen but don't obey. So, and you're strong in all three areas. So that's a huge asset. You hear very clearly, you believe what you hear, and your obedience to it is fairly strong. So, if not very strong. So you got a lot going for you.
Thank you.
So keep crying a river. You will cry it out. I promise you. I know from experience. Which is another asset you have going for you. You have a completely skinless, raw, emotional body, which, again, the world views as weakness, and yet it is the ultimate strength, the ultimate strength. And that's honored here. I mean, before I had these ashrams and before my spiritual training, I could probably count on one hand the number of men I'd seen cry in my whole lifetime, in 30 years prior to my training. And now we have men who cry all the time, openly and happily. And I mean, not everybody does. Some people still have issues about it and self-judgment and shame and whatever, but it's the ultimate. It's the ultimate. Nothing ingratiates a heart to God like crying. Nothing. Bar none. Well, there is one thing that's about the same, that's devotion. Crying and devotion are the two most powerful direct connections to the heart of God. Which, surprisingly, how many people view devotion as pathetic and weak? Almost the entire New Age movement, for one. I don't want to give my power away. Worship someone else. That's weak and pathetic. Bhakti yoga is the highest, fastest path to God. Path of devotion, bar none. No yoga even comes close. Nothing. Because it is the most powerful vehicle to self-love. And self-love is self-realization. Realizing yourself as pure love, as God. And devotion is the physical act, the practice of developing self-love. Ergo, making it the highest, fastest, quickest, most powerful vehicle to God realization. There you go.
Thank you.
That's another asset you have. You have devotion dripping off you like honey from a hive. So.
I love you. Thank you.
And I love you. All right. Have I sufficiently answered your question for today?
Yes.
Addressed your topic. It's more than a question. But
I think it just...
all right. I will be here to remind you.
Here we go.
Forever and a day.